On this week's NESN Patriots podcast, we will recap the Patriots' big win over the New York Jets. We'll discuss the NFL head coaching carousel and preview some of the Patriots' potential upcoming opponents in the postseason. Hello and welcome to the NESN Patriots podcast. I'm Doug Kai, joined as always by Zach Hawks. Zach, how are you doing?
Doing great, Doug. Ready for some playoff football?
Yes, absolutely. We do have one more regular season game to recap before we get to postseason football. But I'd say before we do that, let's talk about that head coaching carousel that I referenced at the top of the show. As usual, like clockwork, annual tradition. Patriots coordinators are rumored to be up for, head coaching opportunities. They're being requested for interviews. They're being linked to teams. So this year, it's interesting because Brian Flores, Patriots linebackers coach, not their official defensive coordinator, seems to be an even more popular option than Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels reportedly has 2 interview requests with the Green Bay Packers and Cincinnati Bengals. Brian Flores, I believe, has 4 interview requests. That's with, off the top of my head, the Browns, the Broncos, the Packers, and one other team I'm missing, and the Dolphins. So, and there's, I think, a report floating out there about the Bucs too, but I'm not sure if it's reputable, so we'll skip that one. But it's definitely interesting that Flores currently seems to have more options than McDaniels if those reports are accurate and if they're, all out there. I don't know. I don't really know where I stand on this as to whether Flores and or McDaniels will or will not leave, but it's certainly interesting to see Flores get so many opportunities.
Yeah, I've kind of gotten the sense for most of this season that the most likely, if one of the two were to leave, Flores would be the more likely candidate. I don't know exactly why I feel like that. Maybe it's just because we went through all the Josh McDaniels stuff last offseason, and then he ended up coming back with what we assume was a sweetened deal from Robert Kraft and maybe some kind of different setup than he had in the past. And it's interesting so far that basically it seems like every team has been linked to Brian Flores so far, and only 2 have reportedly set up interviews with Josh McDaniels. Now, I don't know if that's stemming from what happened last season, if teams are a little scared to sort of put their money on McDaniels given what the kind of last-second reversal that he pulled on the Indianapolis Colts last winter. I don't know how that's going to affect his sort of market this offseason. I would assume that it'll affect it at least a little bit. I mean, especially since it ended up working out okay for the Colts because they got Frank Reich and now they're in the playoffs. But They were really scrambling there for a second because this Josh McDaniels stuff happened after the entire kind of coaching interview hiring window had already ended. So if you're an NFL team, you don't want the kind of chance of that happening again. So I don't know if that's affecting Josh McDaniels' market right now. He is getting at least a little bit of interest out there. So I don't know. It would leave the Patriots in a difficult place if either of those 2 left, and I think it would leave them in an especially difficult place if Brian Flores left, because he was kind of being groomed and is, I guess, continuing to be groomed as the successor for Matt Patricia. Everybody assumes that if he stays next year, he will be the official titled defensive coordinator. And I know you wrote about this week, beyond him, they don't really have an obvious kind of next man up for that role. It might end up having to be Bill Belichick as the defensive coordinator for a year or 2. But I don't know. That leaves them into a kind of some murky waters. Yeah,
I think that Belichick probably would call plays for at least 1 year. And then, Belichick is obviously getting up there in age as well. So if you're talking about Belichick calling plays for a year, that could even carry out his head coaching tenure.
Yeah.
Or if he called plays for a year or 2, sorry about that, coughing. I don't know, I'm still sick or something. But the only other defensive assistants on the staff are Josh Boyer, who's the longest tenured. He's the cornerbacks coach, but he's never moved off of defensive backs and cornerbacks. So I'm not sure if Belichick would be willing to hand him the reins as a defensive play caller, especially since, Flores got the opportunity before him, Matt Patricia got the opportunity before him, but maybe he would be next in line. The only other guys there are Brendan Daly, who's the defensive line coach. He's relatively new to the team. Steve Belichick, Bill Belichick's son, also relatively new to coaching. in general. And then you're talking about DeMarcus Covington, who's probably the assistant linebackers coach right now, but he's currently just a coaching assistant. And Brett Bielema, the former Arkansas and Wisconsin head coach, is an assistant to the head coach or something like that.
Consultant to the head coach,
right?
I think is his official title.
So it's possible that he could be named defensive coordinator next year, but I don't think that that's really Brett Bielema's long-term plan as far as coaching goes, to be an NFL defensive coordinator. I would assume that he would like to get back into college head coaching at some point. So I don't know if that would really benefit anyone to give him the reins as defensive play caller for, a year or two. So like you said, I think that it would probably hurt the Patriots more if Brian Flores left than if Josh McDaniels did, if only because I think that Chad O'Shea is the next in line to become the offensive coordinator. And just having the resource of Tom Brady makes that offensive coordinator position at least a little bit easier. And the Patriots have gone through that transition before with Bill O'Brien. That worked out pretty well for them. The offense didn't really lose a step going from Josh McDaniels to Bill O'Brien back in 2009. And I don't know. I mean, Chad O'Shea's never been an offensive coordinator in the NFL, but I think that he's got the tools in place and he's got the experience in place to handle those responsibilities.
He's done the preseason play calling
right,
before,
he's been groomed for
which is sort of what he was basically in the same spot as Brian Flores in recent years, where he would call plays in the fourth preseason game. He handles the team's red zone offense, so he kind of coordinates all aspects of that. So he's probably definitely the first guy that you would look toward if the Patriots had to replace Josh McDaniels. And then just one more note on those defensive coaches that you mentioned. Before Brian Flores became, even though he's not the official defensive coordinator, before he became what he is now, he coached multiple different spots around the defense.
Right.
Before Matt Patricia became the defensive coordinator, he coached multiple different spots around the defense. Both of them even coached over on the offensive side at least a little bit as well. And all the three coordinators, or the three other position coaches that you mentioned, have only stuck in their position group. So they're all very experienced guys, or most of them at least have been around the NFL for a long time. But there's, as Bill Belichick has talked about a couple times this week, there's a significant leap when you're going just from coaching 6 or 8 guys to trying to coordinate 25 or 30 on your side of the ball. So guys who haven't really had experience coaching positions other than that one, I think it's definitely going to be a little bit of a higher learning curve if they're asked to jump up to a coordinator.
I would also say that when you're coaching safeties or linebackers, which is a lot of the experience that I guess Flores had. Flores coached safeties and linebackers. Patricia coached linebackers, defensive line, and did he also coach safeties? I think he might have. When you're coaching guys in the middle of the field like that, you have to work with so many other position groups that I would say that is different than, he was safeties coach for 1 year.
Offensive assistant offensive line coach, linebackers, safeties, defensive coordinator. So he bounced all around the place.
And like I was saying, I mean, linebackers and safeties, those just work with so many other position groups that it's different than simply coaching cornerbacks like Josh Boyer is doing, simply coaching the defensive line, which is what Brendan Daly's doing. And Steve Belichick is in that safeties role. But, I mean, he's 31 years old. He's the least experienced on the staff. And just the optics of naming your son defensive coordinator or being the next in line for that job might not be great. I don't know if Bill Belichick cares. I mean, both of his sons are already on staff. But I just can't really imagine Steve Belichick being the future defensive coordinator here at this point. And some of that is... No, I won't get into that. Okay. No, I guess I should say it at this point. Some of it is just like the fact that Steve Belichick has long hair. I know that's ridiculous because I actually like the fact that Steve Belichick has long hair. But like, if Steve Belichick was like crew cut, clean shaven, like clean look, like a lot of the other, coaches' sons back in the day, I think people would have a different, there would be different optics around him. And I actually think that Steve Belichick's done a great job with safeties, so I probably wouldn't blast it or I wouldn't criticize the move if he was the next in line to become defensive coordinator, but it would be an interesting look. We've got a guest here. We've got Phil Perry walking into his room that he's graciously allowing us to use to record this week's podcast.
You're doing great.
Thanks, Phil. He's grabbing his...
support good podcasting everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Much appreciated.
Godspeed.
Thank you, Phil. That was perfect because I think we were pretty much done with the coordinator talk. But
yeah, we can move along.
I will, before we get into our next subject, let's just talk about real quickly some of those jobs that are available. Pro Football Talk actually ranked the available coaching positions today, and I haven't really put enough thought into it to to disagree with these rankings, but he had the 8th most appealing job out of 8, being the Bengals, which I do agree with just because the Bengals are a very cheap organization. They barely have any scouts on staff. Their general manager is Mike Brown, who's also their owner. So, I mean, maybe it's a long tenured position. Marvin Lewis was there for how many years?
13
years. Didn't win a playoff spot. So he'll probably be in place there for a while, but it's just not really the greatest place to coach, I don't think. Especially Andy Dalton isn't the most appealing quarterback to coach either there.
Yeah, I think the Andy Dalton factor there, which is also going to be a similar factor to the next team we're going to name, is really kind of probably the least appealing aspect of that. You don't have a quarterback in there, and you don't have a... Where do the Bengals pick this year? Are they like 10 or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
So you don't have a top 3 or 4 pick to kind of get that quarterback. So, yeah, I don't know. The Bengals have been... they've come a long way from being the 90s Bengals, but they still have to... Yeah, that's still not a job that I would personally want.
And, I mean, I know that Marvin Lewis is kind of a laughingstock for the reasons that we mentioned, 13 years without a playoff win. But because he's coming from the Bengals, if I was one of these next 7 teams... I would probably interview him, maybe give him a shot. He's getting a little bit up there in age just because he was with the Bengals for so long, but I actually think that he might have done more with what he was given than other people would have in that same situation.
I mean, if you look strictly at his regular season records, obviously he's notoriously terrible in the playoffs, did not win a single playoff game during his entire tenure, but from 2012 to 2015, he went 10-6, 11-5, 10-5-1, 12-4, and even the last few years where they've been significantly worse. They've won at least 6 games at each of these seasons, sometimes with some pretty bad roster talent. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think Marvin Lewis is a bad coach. I think it was probably past time for him to leave Cincinnati.
His current situation, certainly,
there was no sort of upward trajectory there. But, yeah, I think he's definitely deserving of another job if he wants one.
So then after that, you've got the Dolphins. You've got Ryan Tannehill. Seems like he might not be there next year, though. Cardinals at number 6. They've got Josh Rosen at quarterback. Broncos at number 5. Other than Case Keenum, they don't really have a quarterback. Bucks at number 4. They've got Jameis Winston.
And apparently the next coach needs to keep Jameis Winston, is what Jason Light, the GM, said. So that's going to be a real sticking point for them, which I think is kind of a mistake because I don't think Jameis Winston's that good, especially for all the headaches that he provides off the field. But that's what they're rolling with, so that's what their next head coach is going to have to be okay with.
Jets at number 3. Sam Darnold at quarterback. Packers at number 2. Obviously Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. And Browns at number 1 with Baker Mayfield. I agree with the Browns here. Just looking at this, right, I might swap the Broncos and Bucks on this list.
Yeah, I think the Broncos they don't have the quarterback, and they've really had a lot of issues getting a quarterback. John Elway, for as good as he was as a quarterback, doesn't seem to have that kind of gene for identifying them ever since Peyton Manning left. But they've got a great defense, or maybe not great now. They still have a very good and above average defense. They've got some good running backs, especially Phillip Lindsay, Pro Bowler this year. So they've got some pieces in there, and they just need that quarterback. I think they would definitely be a little bit higher on that list. The Bucs are a bit of a mess. Yeah,
the Bucs are, and even the Cardinals. I like Josh Rosen more than most people do, probably. But I guess the Cardinals might have a new GM soon who might want to hire his own head coach. So you probably have to be pretty impressive right away to keep that job with the Cardinals.
Honestly, I couldn't tell you a single thing that happened with the Cardinals this year, other than their offensive coordinator getting fired midway through the season, and now Steve Wilkes getting canned after 1 year. I know Josh Rosen played.
Sam Bradford was the starter.
Sam Bradford was the starter. Yeah. Every time I looked at Josh Rosen's, I know this is like a PMT bit, but every time I looked at Josh Rosen's stat line, he was going like 6 for 12 for like 87 yards or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Just a lot of bad football being played, and since it was being played in Arizona, nobody paid attention whatsoever.
No.
So, I mean, he was a high pick, though, and based on what I've heard about him, he wasn't a disaster this season. No. He showed some promise, so maybe that's a decent job. They got some decent players over on defense with Chandler Jones and a couple other guys, so maybe that's not bad, but yeah, that's definitely one of the situations where I wouldn't put it up there with the Browns or some of those other teams.
The fact that Wilkes was fired after 1 year, not a great sign there in Arizona either. I would say that if McDaniels got offered the Browns job, I wouldn't be surprised if he took it, just because he's got Ohio ties. He's from Ohio.
And he reportedly loved Mayfield.
Right, that's the other thing, is that they really liked Mayfield before the draft, reportedly. So, but he hasn't been offered it yet. I don't know who the Browns will wind up hiring. They interviewed Greg Williams. They're planning on interviewing Freddie Kitchens, who's our offensive coordinator. Like we said, Brian Flores is up for that job. But one thing that, is at least worth talking about is that 5 black head coaches were fired since the beginning of the season. So there's only 2 black head coaches left in the NFL. Ron Rivera is the only other minority head coach in the NFL.
The two it's Mike Tomlin and Anthony Lynn.
Yeah, correct. Anthony Lynn in the playoffs with the Chargers. Mike Tomlin obviously made it pretty close to the playoffs. He's been with the Steelers for quite a few years now. But Wilkes was fired after 1 year. Vance Joseph was fired after 2 years. Todd Bowles, Marvin Lewis, and Hugh Jackson had all been there for a few years. But and then with the Rooney Rule in place, you always have to be, I guess, slightly skeptical about a guy like Brian Flores, who is an African American, or he's where is he from? He's from
Dominican, I believe. Let me look that up.
But he's a minority head coach, so you always have to take into effect that teams might be, requesting an interview minority head coaches because of the Rooney Rule, and obviously you hope that that's not the case, and you hope that Brian Flores really is as hot of a candidate as he seems to be. But it at least, I guess, has to be talked about when talking about the Rooney Rule and the head coaching carousel and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, Brian Flores, Honduran American.
Yes, Honduran American.
And yeah, that is kind of something that you always have to take into account. I know that was something that we talked about last year when Brian Flores was interviewed with the Cardinals, which we were a little bit surprised. Being like, this is a guy who doesn't even have coordinator experience. Everybody was expecting Patricia and McDaniels, obviously, to get all those looks. But to have Brian Flores kind of be in that mix, it's tough because you never know. You don't want to look at something and be like, this guy's only getting these looks because of the Rooney Rule, or because that have to fill the quota there or whatever. But I think the fact that he received such kind of strong reviews after his Cardinals interview seemed like it might have been, I don't know, even if they went in with that kind of mindset, then he sort of won some people over that way. But I don't know. I've always been kind of conflicted about the Rooney Rule and how it's applied and everything. And it's a difficult thing to kind of talk about and not sound sort of offensive in one way or another. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely something that the league has to kind of continue to look at. I think it's more of a coincidence this year that this just happened to the 5 coaches or so who got fired all happened to be of kind of minority descent. I don't think there's any sort of kind of ulterior motives behind anything like that. No. But it's definitely something. I know
there's also not a lot of minority candidates out there, it seems like.
Which could be part of the problem. I guess you could see that way. There's not enough kind of minority
Eric Bieniemy has interviewed for at least one job, I think. The Chiefs offensive coordinator. Chris Joseph, the Cowboys defensive coordinator, I think is rumored to be up for jobs, but I'm not sure if he's actually taking interviews. I'm not sure about other minority candidates who are out there, but it's definitely something I don't know. Like I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that Brian Flores doesn't deserve the opportunity, because that's definitely not what I'm saying. I think that Brian Flores has done a really good job. I think it's more I'm more just distrusting of NFL teams and NFL ownership to be doing the right thing in these situations, and not just saying like, okay, Brian Flores is a hot candidate. That's an easy way out of actually
check that off the list,
actually applying the Rooney Rule like it's supposed to be applied.
And given all the kind of off-field nonsense that we've seen with the league in the last couple of years, it's hard to give owners the benefit of the doubt on anything, really.
Right, exactly. So that's it for Patriots coordinators. Patriots did play the Jets this week. It was a meaningful game for the Patriots in a way that Bill Belichick described that by winning on Sunday, the Patriots basically won their opening round playoff game because they didn't have to play in the wild card weekend. My biggest takeaway, and probably everyone's biggest takeaway, was just that Tom Brady looked like himself again in that game. And granted, it was against a Jets team without, their top 3 cornerbacks?
I think so, yeah.
Tremaine Johnson, Darryl Roberts, and Mo Claiborne all didn't play.
Darryl Roberts played, I think, a little bit in the game, but he didn't start. Buster Skrine got hurt for a little while. Yeah. It was just a disaster of a Jets team that very clearly did not want to be there. But
but Brady did look way better in that game than he has over the 10 previous quarters.
Yeah, regardless of opponent. I mean, we talked about this on our pregame show. We kind of wanted to just see Brady. It doesn't matter who you're playing. You just want to see Brady look like Brady for the Patriots' sake here. And he did. I mean, he wasn't perfect. He had a couple misfires. He overthrew a wide-open Chris Hogan in the end zone. But overall, this was I guess you could say, a vintage Tom Brady performance because he threw 4 touchdown passes. He really kind of spread the ball around more than we've seen in recent weeks, spread the ball a little bit more downfield than we've seen in recent weeks. And I think I guess everybody kind of had confidence that Tom Brady would have a game like this leading into the playoffs, or still kind of had this kind of game in him, obviously, but we just hadn't seen it in a couple weeks, and you don't know if he was dealing with an injury or if he was just kind of off of his game for whatever reason. But I think from a Patriots perspective, seeing this kind of performance, even though it was against the Jets, going into the playoffs has to be a real kind of confidence booster for the team.
Definitely. I thought the Patriots defense played well in this game. I think they limited Jets running backs to like 3.2 yards per carry. Yep. Josh McCown had a long run, and that's an area of concern in the playoffs. Sam Darnold had a long run, which is an area of concern in the playoffs for the Patriots, just allowing quarterbacks to scramble around. But their pass defense looked good, and their rushing attack was decent, not as good as it had been in recent weeks, but serviceable at least. It wasn't a 270-yard performance or anything like that, but Sonny Michel had a pretty decent game. James White had a good game. And they were able to rip off some fairly long carries in that game.
Yeah, 131 rushing yards, 4.4 yards per carry. Not bad. Solid performance. No kind of nothing to really write home about there. Right. I think the story of the game was definitely Tom Brady and the passing attack. But you definitely don't come out of this game being like, oh, the running attack is a real problem, because it was fine. It
was fine because I was like, oh, well, probably a lot of those rushing yards were by wide receivers, because actually Cordarrelle Patterson had some nice runs. Phillip Dorsett and Julian Edelman
Cordarrelle
both had
Patterson
good runs.
actually didn't play in this game. He had the previous week.
Okay, Phillip Dorsett.
These two last weeks do sort of like blend together for you, since they're basically kind of the same game back to back.
What I meant was Edelman and Dorsett both had they both averaged about 10 yards per carry, right?
Yeah, Dorsett had 2 carries for 16 yards. Julian Edelman had 2 carries for 24 yards.
Yeah, so even if you took those guys out, the Patriots running back still averaged about 4 yards per carry in that game.
Kind of going along those same lines, I want to ask you about the wide receivers. We saw big games from Chris Hogan and from Phillip Dorsett. I guess, relatively speaking, compared to what we've seen from them in recent weeks. Chris Hogan was targeted 11 times, had 6 catches, 64 yards. Phillip Dorsett, 5 catches, 5 targets, 34 yards, and a touchdown. By far the most productive game we've seen from either of them in a long time, really. Do you think that this is sort of a sign of some things to come, that one or both of these guys might be more involved in the playoffs, or do you just think this was playing against the Jets in Week 17 and they're going to go back to their kind of Julian Edelman on every play and with some occasional Cordarrelle Patterson moving forward?
I fear the latter, just because I think that not having Patterson play and having Josh Gordon still not playing because he's suspended, I think that allowed Hogan and Dorsett to kind of get into a rhythm, at least early in this game, and get their feet wet, get some targets, get some playing time. I fear a little bit that once Patterson comes back in, those roles aren't quite as defined, and players like Dorsett or Hogan might just start to get lost in the shuffle a little bit. I think they deserve opportunities. I know that certain Patriots fans are very low on Chris Hogan, and certain Patriots fans are actually conversely very high on Phillip Dorsett.
Very, very high. Too high, I would think.
I think they're both somewhere in the middle. They're both decent wide receivers. Yeah. Hogan definitely should have had a bigger game because Brady missed him on 2 throws where he was wide open in the end zone. But Dorsett made a great catch, kind of snagged the ball out of the air on a scramble drill.
Yeah. One of the better kind of passing plays we've seen from this team in a couple weeks.
Yeah, great pass by Brady, great catch by Dorsett on that play, that touchdown that Dorsett caught. And Dorsett was really only super heavily involved in the passing game early, whereas Hogan got involved much later in the game. He had 3 straight catches on, the fourth quarter drive that they had before the touchdown?
I believe so.
So it was good to see Hogan get involved there at the end, good to see Dorsett involved in the beginning of the game. But, yeah, like you were saying, I do kind of fear that they do start to get lost in the shuffle a little bit more once the playoffs come around. I think that Tom Brady will probably be relying on Julian Edelman very heavily. And obviously, the key for the playoffs is to get Gronk involved because Gronk didn't catch a pass against the Bills, right?
0 catches against the Bills, 2 catches, 24 yards against the Jets. It should have been a better game because he did have a 30-yard catch and run that got wiped out by Dwayne Allen, offensive pass interference. So his stat line should have looked a little bit better, but even if that's added in, I mean that's still just 3 catches for 55 yards. So he definitely has not been nearly as involved as he had been in previous seasons, and I don't know if that's a problem for the Patriots. I think it'll work out fine if they are getting these other guys involved because Gronk is still on the field, still kind of drawing attention from defenses. But, I mean, you just think that this offense would be so much better if Rob Gronkowski was even at 70% of the Gronk that we're used to seeing. And he really hasn't been like that. He's had basically 3 good games this season, or 3 above-average games.
Right.
And for the rest, he's either been invisible or just kind of okay.
Yeah. No, it's definitely been a strange season for Rob Gronkowski. So obviously everyone would like to see him get a little bit more involved once the playoffs roll around. And let's talk about the playoffs. The Patriots will be watching these AFC postseason games obviously very carefully on Saturday and Sunday. On Saturday, the Colts will be taking on the Texans in Houston. And on Sunday, the Chargers will be taking on the Ravens in Baltimore. If the Texans win on Saturday, then the Patriots are playing the Texans in the divisional round. If the Colts win on Saturday, then the Patriots will take on the winner of that Ravens-Chargers game. And selfishly, I would probably rather see the Ravens or Chargers. I feel like the Patriots have played the Texans roughly 2,700 times over the last few years.
You don't want to write Patriots-Texans connections stories ahead of this game?
At least some of those connections are gone. At least Mike Vrabel's gone to the Texans and to the Titans, and at least Vince Wilfork's retired. But no, I feel like DeAndre Hopkins is one of my best friends at this point. I've written about him so much over the last few years like I said, selfishly, I'd probably prefer them to play the Chargers or Ravens, but I think that Patriots fans are feeling a little bit more confident in a home matchup against the Texans. Not only because the Patriots beat them in Week 1.
Yeah, I think that is the best outcome for the Patriots. If they play the Texans, one, because they haven't lost to the Texans since 2009 or early 2010, since that Wes Welker torn ACL game way back in the day. They've dominated the Texans really ever since the Texans kind of came into existence, and they play so much that the teams are very kind of familiar with each other. The Patriots know what the Texans can do on offense and on defense. If they do play the Texans, they will be getting I would say a different Texans offense than they saw in Week 1, just because Deshaun Watson didn't really play all that well in that game. That was his first game back from a torn ACL. You could tell he was kind of working his way back into it. Wasn't nearly as mobile and dangerous as he was when these teams played last year. But I just think the Texans are the weakest of these 3 teams. I think their offensive line stinks. I mean, Deshaun Watson got sacked 42 or 62 times this season. It's the most since John Kitna in 2006. And anytime you're compared to John Kitna, it's probably not a good thing.
No.
Their defense is still really good. Their secondary is actually a lot better this year than it has been in years past. But I just think that's the best matchup for the Patriots, and kind of a double bonus in that if they play the Texans, that means either the Chargers or the Ravens will be playing the Chiefs in that same divisional round. And I think either of those teams has a very real chance of beating the Chiefs in that game.
Yeah.
So if the Patriots play the Texans, beat them, either the Ravens or the Chargers play the Chiefs, beat them, then the Patriots are hosting the AFC Championship game at Gillette Stadium. So I don't know if this team can win in Arrowhead in the AFC Championship game. I guess we'll kind of know more about that by after we see both of those teams play next weekend. But I think it's safe to say that it's definitely a more beneficial situation for the Patriots to be able to host that AFC Championship game.
For sure. And I would also say that, I mean, I don't think the Colts are complete slouches. I think that, I guess there's a better chance that the Ravens or Chargers could beat the Chiefs in KC. But, I mean, the Colts have been really good this year. Andrew Luck's having a really good season. His offensive line has really been getting the job done for him. And they beat the Titans pretty handily on Sunday night.
The Blaine Gabbert effect definitely helped. But overall in that game, the Colts were clearly the better team.
But the Colts are definitely a different team than the Patriots saw early this season when they beat them on a Thursday night, and the Colts were so injured in that
basically
game.
The Colts like JV team in that game.
Yeah, it was brutal. Like guys who contributed, like Marlon Mack wasn't in that game. The only healthy receiver they really had was Chester Rodgers, and who was the other guy? Zach Pascal. So their leading receivers, Dontrell Inman and T.Y. Hilton, weren't in that game. They at one point got so injured that they didn't even have enough.
I think they had 43 or 44 guys by the end of that game, yeah.
Darius Leonard, who's their kind of star rookie linebacker, he also didn't play. He had an interception against the Titans. So
Anthony Costanzo, their lineman, didn't play. It was a really battered Colts team, which is why I think a lot of Patriots fans, I don't know if they're discounting the Colts.
Right.
I can see why they would, just because of the way that game played out earlier this season. But, yeah, if the Patriots do end up matching up with the Colts at some point, which couldn't be until the AFC Championship game, this is a much improved squad over what they saw, whatever that was, 2 months ago, 3 months ago.
Definitely, and that would be very interesting if the Patriots matched up against Colts, given the Josh McDaniels situation we were talking about earlier.
Deflategate rematch.
Yeah, that too. That will do it for this week's NESN Patriots podcast. I'm Doug Kyde. You can follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyde. Follow Zach on Twitter at ZachCoxNESN, and keep it on NESN.com for all of your Patriots coverage.